I'm Hannah Clarke, 25, and the day I earned my MBA, I walked onto a bright Boston stage and found myself staring at two empty chairs with my parents' names taped to the backs. Untouched flowers resting on the seats like apologies. No one delivered. The hall rang with cheers that should have softened the moment, but all I heard was the quiet between my heartbeat and the click of the photographer's shutter. I smiled for the picture because that's what you do when your hands are shaking and you can't set the diploma down. Somewhere, champagne corks were popping for someone else's celebration, and I told myself not to look at my phone. That was the instant I understood how far I had come and how far away home still was. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments and tap like and subscribe if you've ever had to prove your worth without anyone clapping in the front row. I grew up west of the city where maple trees leaned over sidewalks and kids chalked hopscotch squares by the curb, the sort of neighborhood where people waved to each other from porches and every summer smelled like cut grass and sunscreen. My parents, Linda and Robert, prized order and hard work. They kept a tidy house, saved receipts in labeled envelopes, and believed anything worth having came from doing things the proper way. My sister Lauren seemed built for the proper way recitals, with perfect posture debate trophies polished for the mantel, while I folded into the quieter corners and sketched scenes from library books, trying to catch light on paper before it slipped away. No one told me to be small, but it was easier to make room than to take it, so I learned to do the kind of good that doesn't rattle the table finishing chores without being asked, saying thank you with my eyes, if not out loud, keeping my feelings tidy. It made me steady, it made me useful, and it trained my heart to whisper when it wanted to speak. There were years when we had enough, and years when we watched the grocery budget like a thermometer in January steady and a little cold, and I understood early that new shoes might wait until fall if a transmission light came on in July. That practicality shaped me. No tantrums over brands, no hard angles of entitlement, and it met a different kind of world when I took the train into Boston, where some classmates treated coffee the way my family treated holidays, something to be done right and with flourish. In lecture halls, I heard internships named as if they were heirlooms, felt the smooth, confident air of people whose paths had been sanded for them, and I carried my second-hand backpack with a quiet kind of pride. I worked the early shift at a cafe near campus, pulling shots before spreadsheets, and taught myself design software at night because I liked the way colors could say what a person couldn't. It wasn't the loudest life, but it was mine, built from worn textbooks, clean aprons, and a belief that showing up counts even when no one's keeping score. Jenna Morales moved into my dorm the year everything started to feel possible, and she had a way of leaving small kindness wherever she went. Sticky notes on my laptop that read, "Eat first, then fix the world tea bags," tucked inside my notebooks for mornings that needed gentleness. She didn't clap when I earned small wins. She looked at me like I'd always been capable of them, and the air around that look made me braver. Later, in a library study room that smelled faintly like dust and pencil shavings, I met Noah Bennett, who didn't confuse quiet with weak, and who, when I apologized for working 2 jobs, said, "You don't owe anyone an explanation for how you get where you're going." Their steadiness fit the way I was raised. Respect effort, keep your word, but it also challenged something I had learned too well, the habit of shrinking. With them, I practiced taking up space without feeling like I was stealing it. The first real shift came during a semester when the numbers in my bank account and the numbers in my marketing analytics class both tightened their jaw at me. I asked my parents if they could come to a small presentation where my team's project was being evaluated, nothing official, just a chance to see what I was building. I set aside 2 folding chairs, straightened the handouts, twice told myself not to expect too much. They texted late that afternoon that they couldn't make it, and the room filled without them, as rooms often had. The feedback was strong. My hands were steady and still. The part of me that had learned to take the smallest slice of cake went to bed hungry. By the time graduation season loomed, I could thread a budget through the eye of a needle and knew which train car was warmest in winter. I could also feel something new pressing against my ribs, a small insistence that belonging didn't have to come at the price of disappearing. I bought my cap and gown with money from a spring design contract and hung the gown on the back of my closet door, smoothing the fabric with the kind of care I used to reserve for other people's milestones. When the tickets arrived, I wrote my parents' names on the envelopes in careful handwriting, the same way my mother wrote grocery lists, clear, neat, no room for confusion. I set 2 chairs aside in my head and in that hall and told myself that showing up was a language anybody could learn. What I didn't know was how fluently silence would be spoken the day the music started. The week after I mailed the graduation invitations, Boston tilted toward spring, the kind that still smelled faintly of winter salt on the sidewalks. Work at the cafe was steady, classes heavier, and every night I ironed my cap and gown, as if smoothing it could quiet the ache of wondering whether my parents would actually come. I sent them the date twice, once by text, once printed neatly in an envelope. My mother replied with a thumbs-up emoji. My father didn't reply at all. I told myself it didn't matter, that maybe they'd surprise me, that families sometimes find their way back without saying they're sorry. Back then, Lauren was already the shining name in every family conversation. She was finishing her law internship in New York, engaged to Eric, whose family ran a small investment firm. Every update from home sounded like a press release about their future rehearsal dinners, invitations, fittings. I wanted to be happy for her, and I was in the way you can be happy for someone while quietly folding your own disappointment into smaller and smaller squares. My parents lived for her milestones. Mine were usually met with polite nods before the spotlight swung back to her stage. It had always been that way. When I was 8, I drew a watercolor of our backyard maple tree, the one that flamed red each October. The school librarian pinned it near the entrance, and for a week I walked past it feeling proud. When I brought the ribbon home, my mother looked at it while stirring spaghetti sauce. "That's sweet," she said, "but you should spend more time on math. You'll need that one day." The words weren't cruel, just quick, like someone closing a window before a breeze could come in. 2 months later, Lauren's piano recital filled the house. Guests brought flowers, and my father filmed every note. My painting disappeared from the refrigerator door to make space for her program. I remember telling myself it was fine, that maybe the magnets had just lost their grip. But I learned to keep my small joys quiet. By high school, I'd stopped expecting them to attend school events. When the art club held an exhibition at the library, I saved 2 chairs with their names written on sticky notes. The night ended with polite claps from strangers and 2 empty seats that seemed to glow under the overhead light. They'd gone to New York instead. Lauren had a debate competition. On the walk home, I pressed my ribbon between my palms until the paper wrinkled. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was the quiet certainty that I could work twice as hard and still stand behind her shadow. I started pouring that effort into science because numbers didn't need applause. They added up whether anyone noticed or not. My teachers praised my persistence. My classmates asked for help on lab days. Still, when I came home waving a certificate from the district science fair, my father looked over his newspaper and said, "Your sister just got accepted to an internship with a law firm in Manhattan." His tone carried admiration, but not for me. I folded the certificate in half and set it on the counter. College gave me distance, but not freedom. My parents agreed to help with part of the tuition at first, then said money was tight and pulled out completely. I found shifts at a cafe on Commonwealth Avenue and took on freelance design work to fill the gap. The hours blurred, mornings grinding coffee, afternoons chasing deadlines, nights rewriting papers half asleep. Every deposit I made into my student loan account felt like a quiet rebellion, proof that I could carry myself without them. Lauren, meanwhile, sent updates through the family group chat. Photos of city skylines, rooftop dinners, her engagement ring catching the light. My parents filled the chat with hearts and exclamation marks. I texted once about a research project that had been chosen for publication. My mother's reply arrived 3 hours later. "That's nice, sweetheart. Your sister just got promoted to associate." I stopped checking the chat after that. The next summer, I stayed in Boston to finish a marketing internship. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough for rent and groceries. One night, exhausted, I scrolled through social media and saw a video my parents had posted, a cruise deck crowded with laughter. Lauren and Eric stood at the rail while my mother raised a glass of champagne. The caption read, "Celebrating our golden girl before the big wedding." My thumb hovered over the screen until the video looped. I closed the app and went back to editing a design file. The apartment hummed with the sound of the old refrigerator, and for the first time, I realized that loneliness could have weight. Still, I tried to bridge the distance. I called home on my mother's birthday, mailed a card on Father's Day, even offered to visit before the wedding planning began. Each attempt felt like throwing pebbles into a well, small sounds swallowed by a deep, polite silence. When I finally told them about my acceptance into the MBA program, my father said, "That's good, Hannah. Lauren just passed her bar exam, so we're all proud this year." During those first months of grad school, the contrast between us sharpened. Lauren's life looked like a magazine spread of fiancé in tailored suits, parents who flew down for every milestone. Mine was a calendar filled with shifts and deadlines, yet underneath the exhaustion was a stubborn pride. Every bill I paid, every grade I earned, was a quiet declaration that I existed beyond comparison. Sometimes late at night, I'd sit by the cafe's front window after closing and watch the city's last buses crawl past. The reflection staring back was older, steadier someone who no longer waited for applause. I told myself that hard work would eventually make the noise disappear. I didn't realize how much silence still waited ahead. A few weeks before graduation, I sent my parents another message. Details about the ceremony, the seating plan, a gentle reminder that I'd reserved 2 front-row spots. My mother wrote back, "We'll see what we can do, sweetheart. It's close to Lauren's wedding rehearsal, but maybe we'll make it work." I reread that line until the screen dimmed. On the morning of the graduation, I pressed my gown once more and imagined them driving up the interstate, maybe a bouquet on the back seat. By the time my name was called, I had convinced myself they were simply delayed. When the applause filled the auditorium and those 2 chairs remained untouched, the air around them felt colder than the marble floor beneath my heels. That moment should have been the end of wishing, but old habits die quietly. After the ceremony, I waited outside with my phone in my hand. The screen lit up not with a call, but with a video post from my mother, Lauren, and Eric, smiling on a sunlit deck, the ocean glittering behind them, a caption filled with hearts. I stared until the sound of laughter from other families pushed the image out of focus. That night, sitting on my apartment floor with the diploma beside me, I promised myself that I would remember this feeling the hollow where approval should have been. I didn't know yet that within a week, the same silence would turn to something sharper, something that demanded I finally speak. The night after my graduation, Boston's skyline shimmered against a pale mist, and my apartment felt too quiet for the weight of everything I'd just lived through. The diploma sat on my desk like proof of something I wasn't sure anyone else believed existed. I thought that was the end of it. The empty seats, the Facebook video, the slow realization that I would never be enough in my parents' eyes. But 1 week later, my phone rang and my father's name appeared on the screen. For a moment, I hesitated. It had been months since he'd called without a reason, and for the smallest second, I wanted to think he might be calling to congratulate me. I answered quietly, almost whispering, "Hi, Dad." His tone came through sharp, like he was speaking through clenched teeth. "Hannah, your student loan still isn't paid off. It's time for you to help with Lauren's wedding expenses." The words hit me harder than I expected. I blinked, trying to make sense of them. "What do you mean my loan isn't paid off?" I asked. "I finished the payments last month. Every dollar." There was a short silence, then the scrape of his sigh over the line. "Don't argue," he said. "Your mother and I have covered more than you realize. It's only fair that you contribute now. Family is about sacrifice." I sat down slowly, the phone still pressed to my ear. My voice came out calmer than I felt. "Dad, I've got every statement. You didn't pay for my loan." My mother's voice cut in suddenly, high and sharp. "Hannah, don't be dramatic. Lauren's wedding is an important family event. You can't just think about yourself. We all have to make it perfect." Their words tangled together, one on top of another, until I barely recognized the sound of their reasoning anymore. I tried to steady my breath. "Mom, Dad, listen. I paid off the loan myself. I can show you the records. I can send the files." But my father's reply was final, heavy with that tone I'd known my whole life. the one that turned disagreements into accusations. You've always been ungrateful. You wouldn't have finished school without our help. Stop acting like you did this alone. That single line cracked something open in me. I realized that the pattern would never change. They needed me small enough to manipulate, quiet enough to blame. The silence stretched for a beat, and then I said clearly and slowly, "The loan is paid. You didn't help. I'm not sending money for Lauren's wedding." There was a pause, cold, thick, and familiar. My father's voice hardened. "If you hang up this phone, don't bother calling again." My mother murmured something in the background that I couldn't quite catch. I heard the edge of anger and disbelief. I said nothing. I just pressed the red button and set the phone face down on the table. For a long time, I didn't move. The city lights flickered across my window pane, small and distant. Then I opened my laptop and began pulling up every record, bank transfers, payment receipts, email confirmations. Line by line, month by month, I saw what I already knew. Every cent had come from me. The late-night cafe shifts, the freelance projects, the weekends without sleep, they were all there in black and white. The realization brought both clarity and calm. I scrolled through the documents, then opened a new email window. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I wasn't angry anymore, just certain. I began to type, "Subject the truth, my story." The words poured out one after another. I wrote about my graduation day, the empty seats, the video of my family celebrating Lauren on a cruise while I stood alone with my diploma. I explained how they'd fabricated the story about an unpaid loan to guilt me into paying for a wedding I hadn't even been invited to help plan. I attached proof, screenshots, receipts, records. I didn't add blame or insult, just facts. And at the end I wrote, "I'm no longer staying silent. I'm cutting ties with manipulation, not with family. Anyone who wants to stay in touch based on truth is welcome. But I won't be used anymore." I sent the email to every relative in our extended family, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins. Then I sat back and listened to the soft chime that confirmed it was gone. My hands trembled not from fear, but from release. That night I blocked my parents' numbers and turned my phone face down again. The apartment was quiet, except for the sound of rain against the glass. For the first time in years, the silence didn't scare me. I leaned my forehead against the cool window pane and whispered to the reflection, "That's enough." The next morning, messages began to arrive. My grandmother Eleanor called first. Her voice quivered through the receiver. "Hannah, is it true they didn't come to your graduation? I thought they must have been there." When I confirmed it, she sighed softly, the kind of sigh that carries years of realization. "They've favored your sister since she was little," she said. "I just didn't see how deep it went. You did right to tell the truth." Throughout the day, other calls and messages followed. Some relatives apologized, some offered words of comfort, and others simply said, "We understand now." I didn't need anyone to take sides, but it felt like the air around me had changed. For once, people could see what I had carried in silence. A few days later, Jenna came by with takeout and sat cross-legged on my couch while the news of the email spread through the family. "You sure you're okay?" she asked. I nodded slowly. "I think so," I said. "It's strange, but I finally feel lighter." She smiled, handing me a carton of rice. "It's about time they saw who you really are." That weekend, the first cracks appeared in the image my parents had built. One of my cousins texted that at a family barbecue, people whispered about the missed graduation and the cruise video. My father had tried to laugh it off, saying Hannah's always been independent, likes to do things her way. But no one had laughed back. The story that once painted me as the distant daughter was unraveling, replaced by something closer to the truth. Lauren didn't call, but I heard through Jenna that even her fiancé Eric had started asking questions. Why would they skip her graduation, he reportedly asked at dinner. That's not a small event. When my cousin told me that, I didn't know whether to feel vindicated or sad. Maybe both. For weeks I stayed quiet. I didn't respond to gossip or defend myself further. The truth had already been spoken, and I didn't need to prove it again. The city carried on around me, buses rolling past cafes, opening early streetlights humming against the dusk. I went back to work, met with clients, and built the kind of stability I'd once thought required someone else's approval. One night, as I walked home along the Charles River, the air was cool and steady. I thought about the phone call, the email, the silence that had followed. It occurred to me that peace isn't always loud or joyful. It can arrive quietly like an exhale after holding your breath for too long. I didn't know then how much more would come from that single act of truth-telling, the ripple through our family, the changes in Lauren's life, the new strength that would settle into mine. But I could feel something shifting, slow and irreversible, like the tide turning under the city lights. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid to let it. The weeks that followed my email felt like standing in the quiet after a storm, everything still yet slightly rearranged. I'd expected backlash, maybe anger, but what came instead was silence. My parents didn't call. They didn't text. Even Lauren's name stopped appearing on my phone screen. The space between us had finally settled into something real, not the pretend closeness we used to stage for holidays. For the first time, I could breathe without waiting for the next hit of guilt. At work, life moved forward. I poured my energy into new campaigns and the daily rhythm of client meetings. There was something grounding about seeing results, numbers, feedback, and visible progress. Recognition from my boss came gradually, a nod here, a congratulatory email there. It felt nothing like home had ever felt, no favoritism, no shifting rules. It was measurable, earned. Still, moments caught me off guard. Some evenings while walking home past the glow of store windows, I'd see a mother adjusting her daughter's scarf, or a family laughing over dinner, and a quiet ache would settle beneath my ribs. I didn't miss the manipulation. I missed the version of family I'd hoped could exist. Then one afternoon, Jenna burst into my office holding her phone. "You need to see this," she said, her eyes wide. On the screen was a post from one of my cousins, photos from a family barbecue. My parents stood in the background, their smiles thin, the comments beneath polite but careful. People were no longer joining in the usual chorus of praise. A few even asked, "How's Hannah doing? Haven't seen her with the family lately." I scrolled further and noticed a detail that made my chest tighten. Lauren wasn't smiling. Her eyes looked distant, unfocused, as if the attention she once thrived on had turned into something heavier. The perfect family image had cracked, and everyone could see through it now. That night, I went home and sat by the window, the city stretching out below. I thought about the difference between peace and revenge. Peace didn't need an audience. It just needed space. The truth was out there, and it was doing what truth always does, settling quietly into every corner where a lie once lived. A week later, I got an email from a coworker with the subject line, "You'll want to see this." Attached was a local business magazine featuring a photo of me standing in front of the newly rebranded store from our last project. The headline read, "Young Marketer Behind Boston's Retail Comeback." I stared at it for a long moment before a slow smile crept across my face. It had been months of 12-hour days and late-night revisions, but the work had paid off. Our client's business had doubled in revenue, and my name was listed alongside the company's top leadership. My boss, Rachel Dyer, called me into her office that afternoon, beaming. "You should be proud, Hannah. This is big. You've earned every bit of it." On my way home that evening, the air felt lighter, the streets a little brighter. I sent the article to Noah and Jenna, who responded within seconds with rows of exclamation marks and heart emojis. Then, without thinking, I forwarded it to my parents. Just a link and a short message. I did it. For the rest of the night, I tried not to check my phone. I cooked dinner, washed the dishes, watched the lights from the apartment across the street flicker on and off. When my phone finally buzzed, I reached for it quickly. The message was from my mother. Lauren's wedding date is set for October. She's over the moon. We'll keep you updated. No mention of the article. No congratulations. Just a redirect back to the only story that had ever mattered to them. I set the phone down carefully, as if it were something fragile that might break the moment I breathed wrong. But instead of crying like I once would have, I made tea, turned on a playlist, and opened the magazine again. I traced my name under the printed headline and felt a steady calm fill the space their silence left behind. The next few weeks became a blur of interviews and new project offers. Clients requested me by name, and my supervisor hinted at a promotion before the year's end. Each success stacked quietly on the last, until one morning I realized I hadn't thought about my parents in days. The absence of their judgment had turned into freedom. Then in early fall a call came from my grandmother. Her voice was soft but carried a new edge of disappointment. "Your parents stopped by last weekend," she said. "They mentioned how busy they've been with the wedding. But Hannah, everyone knows the truth now. People ask questions they can't answer." I didn't say anything for a moment. She continued. "Your father looked smaller somehow, not angry, just tired. I think the silence is finally catching up to them." After that call, I didn't dwell on it. I had learned that closure doesn't always arrive as an apology. Sometimes it comes as distance. My life had begun to take its own shape, work friends and quiet weekends spent with Noah exploring little towns along the coast. We'd find small diners with paper menus and talk about the kind of future we wanted, one built on steadiness, not approval. In October, when Lauren's wedding came and went, I didn't see a single photo online. My cousin later mentioned that it had been small and subdued. "Eric seemed uncomfortable," she said. "He's a good man. Maybe he sees things differently now." A month later, an email landed in my inbox from a company recruiter. They'd seen the magazine feature and wanted to offer me a creative director role at their New York branch. It meant a bigger team, better pay, and a chance to lead campaigns on a national scale. I said yes, without hesitation. Before moving, I visited the Charles River one last time. The water reflected the city lights, the same view I'd turned to on nights when I felt invisible. Now it looked different, still, confident, familiar. I thought about that girl who once waited for her parents to show up at the library at the science fair at graduation. She'd been alone then, but she'd kept walking anyway. When I returned home, I packed my things slowly. The framed diploma went into a box, followed by the magazine article. At the bottom of the same box, I placed a photo I'd kept tucked in a drawer, the one from graduation day, where I stood smiling with 2 empty chairs behind me. It no longer made me sad to look at it. It was proof of what I'd survived. The next morning, Noah met me at the train station, his hand wrapped around mine. As the train pulled away, Boston slipped out of view, replaced by the promise of something new. I didn't know what waited in New York, new challenges, new people, maybe even new wounds, but I knew one thing for certain. The life I was building was mine alone, not a performance for anyone else to applaud. And somewhere miles behind me, the story that had once defined me was unraveling thread by thread, leaving space for a better one to begin. New York moved faster than I could keep up at first. The hum of traffic under my apartment window felt constant, like a heartbeat I hadn't learned to rest beside. My days filled with meetings, client calls, and design sessions that stretched late into the night. The office overlooked Fifth Avenue, and on good days, the morning light bounced off the glass in a way that made the city seem endless. I was learning how to live without the weight of waiting for someone's approval, and for the first time it didn't feel like pretending. Noah transferred his consulting work to the city a few months after I did, and we settled into a rhythm that was new for both of us. We worked long hours, but we found small rituals: coffee together at the corner cafe, late walks through Bryant Park when the streets quieted. There was something healing about building a life from scratch, just the two of us, no shadows from the past trailing behind. Work was demanding, but I loved it. Every campaign was a puzzle, and I'd become known for seeing patterns no one else noticed. The long hours didn't scare me anymore. They gave me purpose. I'd wake before sunrise, watch the sky turn from gray to gold, and remind myself that this was the life I'd built with my own hands. 6 months into the move, Rachel Dyer, my former boss from Boston, called unexpectedly. "I just wanted to tell you something," she said, her voice warm through the line. "That campaign you led last year, it's being used as a case study now. You should be proud, Hannah. You changed how they think about local branding." I thanked her, and when the call ended, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, letting those words sink in. A few days later, an email arrived from an industry magazine asking to feature me in an article about women shaping the future of marketing. They wanted to photograph me at the office. The shoot was set for a Friday morning, and when I walked in that day, the team surprised me with flowers. Noah sent a text that read, "Proud doesn't even cover it." I smiled at the screen, thinking how far I'd come from the girl who once waited alone at a school art exhibit. That night I posted one of the photos online, me standing in the glass lobby, a soft smile, the city skyline blurred behind me. Within minutes, the comments filled with congratulations from colleagues and friends. Then somewhere down the list a name I hadn't seen in a long time appeared. Hannah Clarke Walsh. "You look amazing, Hannah. Congratulations." For a few seconds I just stared at it. My hands hovered above the keyboard, uncertain. It wasn't much, just a comment, but coming from her, it carried years of silence. I didn't reply. I didn't delete it either. The next morning, she sent a direct message. "Can we talk sometime? I think I owe you one." I waited a full day before answering. "Sure. Coffee next week." We met on a Wednesday afternoon at a cafe in Midtown. When I walked in, Lauren was already there, hands wrapped around a paper cup, eyes tired in a way I hadn't seen before. Her wedding ring caught the light when she waved me over. For a while, we just sat there, the hum of conversation filling the space between us. Finally, she said quietly, "I know what they did. About your graduation. About the money. I didn't see it then, but I do now." Her voice trembled, and I could tell the words didn't come easily. "After your email," she continued, "people stopped looking at us the same way. Eric asked questions I couldn't answer. I kept trying to defend them, but the more I talked, the less sense it made. I didn't interrupt. I just let her speak." She wiped her eyes quickly, embarrassed. "I thought being the favorite meant they loved me more," she said, "but it only meant they expected me to keep their stories alive. I'm tired, Hannah. I just wanted you to know that I see you now." I took a slow breath. For years, I had imagined what an apology might sound like. None of those versions had been this quiet. "Thank you," I said. "That means something." We didn't talk long after that. She had to go and I had a meeting, but before leaving, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm not asking you to forgive them," she said softly. "Just don't let them take any more of your peace." When she walked out into the afternoon light, I felt something loosen in my chest. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was the first time in years that the distance between us didn't hurt. That weekend, I told Noah about the meeting as we cooked dinner together. He listened quietly, chopping vegetables while I spoke. When I finished, he said, "Maybe this is where it starts turning around." I nodded but didn't answer. Some wounds heal differently. They don't close all at once. Winter came early that year. The city glittered under holiday lights, and work slowed enough for me to notice how good life had become. One night, as snow began to fall outside our window, Noah turned from the couch and said, "Let's host Christmas this year. Just us, Jenna, maybe a few friends." We did. The apartment filled with laughter, the scent of cinnamon and roasted vegetables. Jenna brought wine. Our neighbors stopped in with pie. For once, December didn't carry the weight of old disappointments. When the night ended, I stood at the window watching snow settle over the street and thought about how silence could change shape. It could be loneliness, or it could be peace. In January, the promotion came through. Creative director, a corner office, a bigger team, and a view that stretched across the skyline. I took the offer without hesitation. That afternoon, I called Eleanor, my grandmother, to tell her. She laughed softly through the line. "I knew you'd make it," she said. "You always had it in you. You just needed the space to show it." Her words stayed with me long after the call ended. I printed the business magazine feature and framed it beside my diploma. For years I had chased validation from the wrong people, but standing in that office sunlight spilling across my desk, I realized I didn't need their applause anymore. Late one evening, as I packed up to leave work, a delivery person dropped a small box on my desk. No return address, just my name in neat handwriting. Inside was a folded note and a picture frame. The note read, "For your new office. Thought you might want this back." It was the photo from my graduation, me on stage in my cap and gown, 2 empty seats visible in the corner of the frame. I knew instantly who had sent it. Lauren. I set it on my desk, staring at it for a long time. The chairs no longer looked like symbols of loss. They looked like boundaries I had chosen to draw. That night I left the office and walked through the city until the lights blurred into a soft haze. Somewhere between the quiet sidewalks and the sound of distant horns, I understood that I'd crossed a line I could never go back from. The girl who once waited for approval was gone, and the woman who had replaced her had learned what real peace looked like, steady earned, and hers alone. I didn't know it yet, but the final piece of closure, the one that would redefine what family truly meant, was already on its way. Spring in New York carried a kind of brightness that made every street look new again. The trees outside my apartment had begun to bloom soft pink petals, collecting on the windshield of parked cars. I was adjusting to the rhythm of the city, to the morning crowds, to the way the light changed between the tall buildings, and to a life that finally felt like it belonged to me. Work was steady and fulfilling. I led meetings with confidence I didn't recognize at first, the kind that comes only from surviving what used to break you. One afternoon, I was reviewing a campaign proposal when my assistant appeared in the doorway. "There's someone asking for you in the lobby," she said. "She says her name is Lauren." My pen froze mid-note. It had been months since our coffee meeting, months since that fragile apology. I nodded and told her to send her up. Lauren looked smaller somehow. The sharpness she used to carry softened by something heavier. She smiled faintly when she stepped inside my office. "You look good," she said, eyes scanning the framed photos on my shelf. "I saw the article about your promotion." "Thank you," I replied, keeping my tone even. "What brings you here?" She took a slow breath and handed me a sealed envelope. "I didn't know how else to give this to you. Mom asked me to deliver it." I hesitated before taking it. "What is it?" "A letter," she said quietly. "From her." She wanted to explain. I placed it on the edge of my desk but didn't open it. Lauren watched me, her expression unreadable. "They're not doing well, Hannah," she said finally. "Dad's company lost a big contract. The house might go. I think they're starting to realize how much they pushed you away." Her words hung in the air like dust caught in sunlight. "I'm sorry for what they're going through," I said. "But that doesn't erase what happened." "I know," she said, nodding slowly. "I just thought you should hear it from me before someone else reached out." She looked around the office again at the view, the flowers on the windowsill, the framed diploma on the wall. "You really built something beautiful." When she left, the envelope still sat unopened. I went back to my meeting notes, but the words blurred. That night, I carried the letter home and set it on my kitchen counter. I didn't touch it for 2 days. When I finally opened it, the paper smelled faintly of my mother's perfume, the same scent she used to wear on holidays when she'd hug Lauren first and brush past me. The handwriting was neat practiced. "Hannah," it began, "I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to understand. We thought we were doing what parents should, pushing you to be stronger, to not need us. Maybe we confused strength with silence. Maybe we believed love had to be earned." I read it twice, the second time slower. There was no grand apology, no promise to change, just pieces of regret woven through explanations that couldn't undo years of absence. I folded it back into the envelope and placed it in a drawer. Some things didn't need an answer. Weeks passed, and life filled the space the letter had opened. Noah and I moved into a larger apartment near Central Park. We painted the walls ourselves one weekend, laughing as we left handprints on the drop cloth. The following month, he proposed quietly on the rooftop at sunset. No crowd, no fanfare, just the two of us and the sound of the city below. The wedding was simple and small, held in early autumn. Jenna stood beside me, wiping tears from her eyes during the vows. Lauren came too, sitting in the second row. My parents were not invited, though I had considered it more than once. I didn't need their absence to be a statement anymore. It was simply a boundary that stayed where it belonged. After the ceremony, Lauren approached me while the music played softly behind us. "You looked happy," she said. "They wanted to come, you know, but they knew you wouldn't want them there." I met her gaze. "They made their choices long before this day," I said gently. She nodded, slipping her hand into Eric's. "Maybe one day things will look different." Maybe, I said, though we both knew that hope was a fragile thing between us. That night, after everyone had gone home, Noah and I sat on the balcony of our hotel room, city lights stretching into the distance. "Do you think you'll ever talk to them again?" he asked quietly. I thought for a long moment before answering. "If I do, it won't be to fix the past. It'll be to tell them I'm at peace." A few months later, that peace was tested sooner than I expected. My grandmother Eleanor called one morning, her voice trembling. "Hannah, your father's health isn't good," she said. "It's his heart. They might need surgery." I sat down, holding the phone tightly. "When?" "Next week," she said. "They're scared, though they'd never admit it. Your mother's been trying to reach you. I hadn't seen a single missed call. She must have been dialing my old number. For a long time, I said nothing. Then I asked, "Do you think he wants to see me?" "I think he wants to believe you might come," she replied. That evening, I told Noah what had happened. He didn't pressure me, he just listened. "Whatever you decide," he said, "make sure it's for you, not for who they used to be." The next morning, I stood in front of my closet, unsure what to pack. The decision felt heavier than any I'd made before. It wasn't anger holding me back, it was the question of whether forgiveness always required presence. In the end, I didn't make the trip. I sent flowers instead, along with a simple note, "Wishing you a safe recovery. Hannah." 2 weeks later, Eleanor called again. "He's out of surgery," she said, her tone lighter this time. "He'll be all right." When he woke up, the first thing he asked was if you'd written that note. I closed my eyes. The sound of relief mixed with something quieter, something like closure. In the months that followed, my parents stayed silent. Maybe they understood now that silence could also mean peace, not punishment. Lauren and I spoke occasionally, small updates that didn't reach too deep. It was enough. By spring, life had settled into something steady. Noah and I spent weekends exploring the city Jenna visited often, and my grandmother's voice on the phone remained the thread that still tied me gently to where I came from. One evening after a long day at work, I stood by the window in our apartment watching lights flicker across the park. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was standing on opposite sides of something broken. I was simply living free, grounded, and whole. Still, I didn't know that the final step toward healing, the one I hadn't dared to imagine, was already moving quietly toward me. And it would arrive not through words, but through something far simpler. The year I turned 30, everything seemed to come full circle. Work had settled into a rhythm that no longer consumed me, and our apartment, once a symbol of independence, had become a warm, lived-in space filled with quiet laughter and small fingerprints on every surface. Lucas had just turned 2, a whirlwind of energy and wonder, always pointing at the world as if discovering it for the first time. Noah and I spent our evenings chasing him around the living room, the sound of his laughter echoing off the walls that once held only silence. On a chilly Sunday morning in early March, as sunlight spilled through the curtains, I found a small envelope tucked under our front door. The handwriting was unmistakable, my mother's neat and careful. There was no return address, only my name written across the front. I stood there for a long moment before opening it. Inside was a short note. "We heard about your son. We'd like to meet him someday if you'd allow it." I read it twice, then set it on the kitchen counter. The words were measured, polite, almost cautious. No apologies this time, no explanations, just a quiet request. When Noah walked in, coffee mug in hand, he noticed the letter and raised an eyebrow. From them he asked gently. I nodded. "What do you want to do?" he said. I didn't answer right away. The truth was, I didn't know. The anger that used to rise at their name was gone, replaced by something softer, an understanding of distance that no longer hurt. I spent the rest of that morning playing with Lucas on the rug, his laughter steady and bright. Every time he reached for my hand, I thought about all the times I had reached for theirs and found nothing but air. A week passed before I wrote back. My message was short. "You can visit, Sunday afternoon. No expectations." I hit send before I could change my mind. The day they arrived in New York was in one of those in-between moods, half sunshine, half wind. I opened the door to find my parents standing on the threshold, both looking smaller than I remembered. My father's hair had gone gray at the temples, and my mother's eyes carried the tired look of someone who'd been waiting too long to speak. "Hello, Hannah," she said softly. "You look well. Come in," I said, stepping aside. They entered slowly, glancing around the apartment like guests in a place they weren't sure they belonged. The scent of roasted vegetables filled the air. Noah was in the kitchen finishing lunch, Lucas toddling at his feet. When my parents saw him, something in them shifted. My mother knelt tentative, as if afraid to startle him. "Hello there," she whispered. "You must be Lucas." He stared at her for a moment, then handed her one of his toy cars. She smiled through a rush of tears. My father crouched beside him, watching quietly. "He's got your eyes," he said to me, voice barely above a murmur. Lunch was careful, polite conversation sprinkled with silences. They asked about work, about life in the city, about the little boy who was now stacking blocks on the coffee table. Every answer felt like testing water after years of drought. When the meal ended, my mother reached across the table, her hand trembling slightly. "We know we've lost time. We can't get back," she said. "But if you'd let us, we'd like to know him, to know you again, even just a little." I looked at her, at the woman who had once turned pride into a weapon and silence into love's substitute. There was no script for this moment, no neat ending waiting on the other side. But I nodded. "We'll take it one step at a time." She exhaled as if she'd been holding her breath for years. My father gave a small nod of gratitude, eyes glistening. "That's more than we deserve," he said quietly. They stayed for an hour after that. When they left, Lucas waved from the doorway, giggling as my mother blew him a kiss. The apartment felt lighter once the door closed, not because they were gone, but because something long frozen had finally moved. Over the next few months, they visited a handful of times, always brief, always gentle. There were no long conversations about the past, only small exchanges that built something steady and new. My mother brought cookies once, unsure if Lucas would like them. He did. My father fixed a loose hinge on the kitchen cabinet without being asked. It was strange seeing them do things that once would have been unthinkable, quiet acts of care that spoke louder than any apology could. Lauren called one evening not long after their third visit. "I heard Mom and Dad have been seeing you," she said, her tone cautious. "How's it been?" "It's different," I replied. "They're trying, but it's slow." She sighed. "I'm glad. They talk about Lucas all the time. Maybe this is their way of learning what family should have been." Her words lingered after the call ended. Maybe she was right. Maybe some lessons take a lifetime to learn. By the time summer arrived, the visits had become part of our routine. Some Sundays, my parents would stop by for lunch. Other times, they'd meet us at the park. They never overstepped, never tried to rewrite history. Instead, they watched quietly grateful as their grandson chased butterflies across the grass. One afternoon, as we sat on a bench watching Lucas play, my father spoke without looking at me. "When I was younger, I thought success was something you could measure, money, titles, control. I see now it's about the people who still answer the door when you knock." For the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to correct him. I just nodded and let the silence stretch between us, peaceful and full. That fall, I received an invitation in the mail, a family gathering at my grandmother's house in Massachusetts. It had been almost a decade since I'd set foot there. I placed the card on the table, running my fingers over the embossed letters. When I told Noah, he smiled. "You should go," he said, "if it feels right." A month later, I found myself driving along the familiar winding road toward the white farmhouse. The leaves had turned gold and red, carpeting the ground in color. When I parked, I could see relatives scattered across the lawn, faces, older, softer, but still recognizable. Inside, laughter spilled from the kitchen. My grandmother greeted me with open arms. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "Not for what you've done, but for how you've learned to live." Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and the air filled with the smell of apple pie, I stepped out onto the porch. My parents stood a few feet away talking quietly. When they noticed me, my mother smiled and beckoned me over. "You remember how your father used to say you were too independent for your own good?" she said with a small laugh. "He was wrong. You were exactly who you needed to be." I looked out at the yard where Lucas was running with his cousins, the sky glowing in shades of orange and rose. "Maybe we all were," I said softly. The three of us stood there for a while, not as a perfect family, but as people who had finally stopped running from the truth. There were still gaps between us, unspoken things that would never fully close, but in that moment it didn't matter. What mattered was that we were here together, at least enough. When I left that night, my mother hugged me for the first time in years. It wasn't tight or tearful, just steady, the kind of embrace that said everything words couldn't. Driving back to New York, headlights tracing the curves of the highway, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Not triumph, not regret, but peace. I didn't know it then, but that peace would stay. And years later, when the picture of those 2 empty chairs hung in my living room, it would no longer remind me of what was missing. It would remind me of how far I had come. When I look back now, the memories don't carry the same sharp edges they used to. Time has a way of sanding things down, leaving only what matters. Years have passed since that evening on my grandmother's porch, the one where my parents and I stood under the fading light without needing to fill the silence. We didn't solve everything that night, but maybe we didn't have to. Some endings aren't about resolution. They're about rest. Life since then has been gentle in a way I never expected. Lucas is 8 now, tall enough to reach the top shelves I used to guard for him. Noah and I moved into a small house outside the city, the kind with a creaking porch and a yard full of daisies in summer. I work fewer hours these days teaching part-time at a community college, helping young designers who remind me of the person I once was, hopeful, tired, and determined to prove themselves. My parents visit sometimes. They never overstay, never assume. My mother brings homemade bread wrapped in a kitchen towel. My father insists on mowing the lawn, even when I tell him it's fine. We talk about small things, recipes, whether Lucas's latest school project. The conversations aren't deep, but they're real. Every visit feels like another brick laid quietly in the bridge we're still building. Lauren and I talk more now, too. She and Eric moved closer after their second child was born. The 4 of us gather a few times a year, our children tumbling across the grass, while we sit on the porch, grateful for the second chances time can offer. One afternoon last fall, I found my father sitting in the backyard watching Lucas rake leaves into uneven piles. He looked up and said, "You know, I still think about the day we missed your graduation." His voice was steady, but his eyes carried years of regret. I sat beside him, hands folded in my lap. "You can stop thinking about it," I said quietly. "That chapter's over." He nodded slowly, a faint smile touching his face. "You always were stronger than I knew." It wasn't an apology this time, it was recognition. And that was enough. The picture from that day still hangs in my living room, the one of me standing on stage with 2 empty chairs behind me. I used to see it as a symbol of everything I lost. Now I see it differently. Those chairs aren't a reminder of who didn't show up, they're proof of who did. I showed up for myself. I kept standing when no one clapped, and that's a kind of victory that doesn't fade with time. Sometimes late at night when the house is quiet, I think about the girl I was, the one who used to believe love had to be earned, that worth came from being chosen. I wish I could tell her that she didn't have to chase approval, that the life waiting ahead of her would be built not on validation, but on truth. I'd tell her that justice doesn't always come as punishment. Sometimes it arrives as peace. My grandmother passed last year. In her will, she left me her old locket, the one she used to wear every Sunday. Inside, there's a small folded note in her handwriting. "You found your way, Hannah. That's all I ever prayed for." I keep it in my desk drawer right beside the letter my mother wrote me years ago. 2 very different kinds of love, both part of the same story. The older I get, the more I realize that justice in life isn't always about righting every wrong. It's about choosing how you carry what remains. Some wounds heal through confrontation, others through quiet acceptance. I chose peace, and it changed everything. Now when I walk Lucas to school, I watch him run ahead with his backpack bouncing against his shoulders, full of the kind of confidence I once envied in others. He always turns back to make sure I'm still there. I wave, and he grins before disappearing through the doors. Every time I see that smile, I'm reminded that breaking the cycle is its own kind of redemption. If you've ever been the one left behind, or the one unseen, I hope you remember this. You are allowed to build a life that feels like safety, even if you had to start from nothing. You're allowed to forgive without forgetting to move forward without permission. The road may be long, but peace is waiting at the end of it. Thank you for walking through this story with me. If it spoke to something in your own life, take a moment to share it or simply reflect on how far you've come. Sometimes that's the most powerful story of all, the one you live after the storm has passed.